Everybody, welcome to the Procure Smarter podcast. I am your host, Dr. Sharon Cook. We are sponsored by the ProcureSmart Purchasing Agency. If you need assistance with FF&E for a renovation, new construction, we would love to talk to you. Okay, guys, today we are talking to Mr. Rich Ham. In early 2002, Rich resigned his position from an industry-leading uniform supplier. You know who they are. And he founded FineTune in his basement in Bloomington, Indiana. He's going to talk about predatory practices from some big ticket vendors. So stay tuned. We're looking forward to it. All right, guys, hang on. Hi, everybody. We're back. We have Mr. Rich Ham with us. Hi, Rich. How are you?
Hey, Sharon. I'm doing great. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, listen, I tried to get you on months ago. You have a really good story and I really want to hear about it.
Well, thanks. I'm happy to share whatever I can today.
All right, so for all my guests, I'd like to hear about your journey. Like, I know you came from Cintas, but I want to hear, like, how did you get here where you're at now?
Well, I was a journalism and political science major back in college. I went to Indiana University. So naturally, I own a niche expense management consulting business. It was a totally straight line between those two. I jest, of course. I worked my first job out of school. I worked at the newspaper in Bloomington, Indiana, the Herald Times, and I was in advertising sales and wrote about basketball on the side. But one of my advertisers was Cintas, and they dangled a paycheck in front of me, and I took that job. And but about 2.5 years, 3 years into that gig, I had a light bulb moment where I saw, I kind of felt like I was selling a service where I always had the upper hand on even the smartest buyers that were, either negotiating contracts with me or trying their best to manage the expense that we were selling. And so I thought there was a good opening there for a niche consulting enterprise. And so, I made the decision to launch into that space, knowing that if we went in with a model of, typical contingency based, hey buddy, I'll save you some money on X if you'll share the savings with me, that kind of a deal, that was a very adaptable and scalable business model. And as we found other expenses that met similar criteria as the uniform and industrial laundering industry, we could easily expand and diversify into those areas. We didn't have the word yet, but we've come to see that the tie that binds the expenses that we specialize in, here 20 plus years later, is nuisance expenses. Or what we mean by that is really just kind of, on one level, it's expenses that take up more time than they're worth, where the monetary priority and management time, the relationship between those two is all out of whack. It's kind of an unhealthy relationship. And secondly, though, they're the kinds of relationships where even the best efforts of the smartest procurement professionals, tend to be rapidly eroded after deals get done, and where the promises of procurement to internal stakeholders, operators, P&L owners, tend to be most frequently broken. And so those are the characteristics of the expenses that we've been looking at, along the way as we've diversified what we do. And today we specialize in a small handful of, the indirect services world's most complex expenses.
Right. There are things that I call like the necessary evils, right?
Oh yeah, I've heard that phrase many times through the years.
Yeah, if you're a purchasing agent like me, I've done purchasing 25 plus years, but these are things that you really have to be an expert at to get a good deal, because it's very tricky, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I've often said that the expenses we specialize in aren't 3 card Montes, they're 3,000 card Montes. And they've only gotten more complex through the years because I think, we were around before the Great Recession. And I remember a time where the average purchasing professional that I would be dealing with, had a really good handle on what was happening within whatever categories they were responsible for. To the extent of even being, aware of what was happening at the invoice level and being on top of non-compliance and kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, very much engaged in the joust with their suppliers on a continuous basis over the bottom line. Well, then the Great Recession arrives. and procurement departments are, certainly targeted for cost savings. And, even in the healthier times, as we've bounced back since then, before the pandemic arrived, I don't think procurement resources ever really came back, and certainly didn't keep up with overall company growth. Then the pandemic arrives again, there's cost cutting pressures and departments are leaned out. And, today, I think the average purchasing professional is being asked to do the work of maybe 2 to 3 people of 2007. And so, that inevitably creates certain vulnerabilities. And I think one of the most acute vulnerabilities has been the ability to really manage expenses. It's hard for most of the folks that I deal with to get much beyond negotiate contract, execute, lob it over the wall, and hope for the best. And I'm being a little cheeky there, but the truth is, the resources aren't there to really engage in the joust with suppliers. And so, I think what's critical to note is that these suppliers have noticed this, and in these really complex indirect services industries, they have realized, wow, my customers really aren't equipped, to engage in that joust with me after deals go live. And so all I need to do is devise, a wide range of buttons that I can push and levers that I can pull to extract, margin out of deals after the negotiation is done. And so we've just seen one after another, new strategies, get come down the pipeline in these categories. And, the result is margins have just grown and grown and grown. And it's caused, there's a visual we use in a stock sales PowerPoint we use that we call the nuisance expense roller coaster. And it kind of depicts the norm of the average really complex indirect service, where once every 3 to 5 years, a procurement professional comes in and does something, and that something has some value, but then the efforts are quickly eroded and costs start to rise again. And 3 to 5 years later, they come in and do something again, and they ride that roller coaster ad infinitum. And so it's, what we try to do is come in and solve that, drive cost to optimal and keep them there with more of a dedicated, vigilant approach to managing these really burdensome expenses.
Right. So I want to make sure that the people who are listening understand, you really took an idea of these services. Like, you started with uniforms, but then you grew, right? You grew into pest control, chemicals, which is a crazy one. And you took these, what can be really daunting contracts, and you go through them and you look for what you call predatory practices, right? Things that, kind of blindside a buyer who's not really careful.
Yeah. And I haven't always used the phrase predatory, but I suppose like there is an element of that. It's like the prey is profits, right? And they're in it for their shareholders. And so, they are the predators that are after your money, and they want to grow your spend. And they've devised a wide range of strategies to do that. And, they're complex problems to solve, even if you have abundant resources, even if your people never turn over, even if you have the technology you need and all the industry intel you need, to really effectively kind of be a worthy adversary for these suppliers who obviously really know their stuff. But of course, that's not the lay of the land right now. Departments are lean, people turn over all the time, responsibilities get shuffled and reshuffled. I don't have a definitive data point here, but my team and I were kind of surmising that the average lifespan that a category manager, remains in place responsible for a category before some kind of a turnover event can't be much more than about 2 years.
Wow.
And that doesn't necessarily mean people are even leaving. They're getting promoted.
Mm-hmm.
The responsibilities are reshuffled, and every time it's like you're starting fresh. And so there's often not really a through line in a company's efforts to manage these expenses. And it was already hard enough, and now you've got all that happening. And so, yeah, we've tried to offer us, a solution to these persistent problems. And yeah, just to round out the category offering, waste and recycling was a really obvious one for us. The practices in that arena, you use the word predatory. I would actually go ahead and, echo it there strongly. And I would say brazen, they're just, from a willingness to be not compliant with contract standpoint, and engaging in really, I would say, blatantly anti-competitive behaviors. That is an arena that has has major problems, I think, from a fundamental competition standpoint because of landfill ownership and industry consolidation. So we knew there was a big need there. And more recently, as inflation has arrived, we found a lot of success in our security guard services offering and we're in process of launching into other categories too, where there's both a labor component and then often a stuff component like janitorial, where you've got time plus purchasing stuff. And so yeah, these are the kinds of expenses that we're really kind of deep in the weeds of.
So I'm sure over the years of doing this, you have seen some crazy stuff. Do you have an example of like the most brazen that you've seen?
Oh gosh. Well, in the uniform industry, the games that get played with inventory are at times just really astonishing. I mean, I remember a number of years back, a large life sciences client of ours had a campus where, if the invoices were to be believed, you would have guessed they were using, in the neighborhood of 12,000 bath towels a week. And their people did have to bathe on the way in and on the way out of their facility. But, it just didn't, the folks on my team who understood it, been executives on the supplier side of the industry and kind of knew, a lot about that expense. We're like, there's just no way. The number of people they're telling me, and they went and visited the site and did the very glamorous work of putting on the rubber gloves and literally counting bath towels right before the supplier's delivery person showed up. And not only was it not 12,000, it was like 880, for the week. It was like a 12, 13-fold overcharge. And, so just inventory that flat out doesn't exist. When we see inventory numbers on an invoice, we're always asking two questions. Does my client have what the invoice suggests they have? And are they using what they actually have? Very often the answer to both is no. And you'll see just tons and tons of games played in that arena alone. You go over to guard services, and there's so many games played with guard levels, overtime, holiday pay. Gosh, during the pandemic, there were exorbitant overcharging related to temperature screening, and just the hourly rate that ended up being paid in some cases for somebody to hold a thermometer up to an employee's forehead would have shocked you. And so, yeah, I could probably regale you with stories for days on end. Oh, here's the last good one. And I know some of your listeners probably, do occasionally really have an acute need for pest control services. That arena, talk about the fox guarding the hen house. Customers typically rely on their pest control supplier to tell them when they have a problem, right? Well, of course, on many levels, a pest control supplier has an incentive to tell you have a problem, because then the solution is spend money with me and I'll fix it, right? And so there are these services when you have an infestation, and this is especially big money in food processing environments, but in others too, called foggings and fumigations. It's where a facility needs to be like really, treated aggressively because of an infestation. Well, we've seen numerous instances where, a customer has kind of been trained to believe that every summer, maybe July 4th week, because that's maybe more of a convenient time to shut down a plant for a couple of days. You just have to do this big fumigation because every year these beetles come in and they infest our plant, and and nobody wants an infestation in a food plant, so you got to do it. Well, the one thing that doesn't get said is like the same infestation occurs every year because of a crack in the foundation of the plant. And if only that crack were filled, this $250,000 event that also involves operational disruptions could be avoided.
Wow.
But the pest control supplier likes that $250,000 event. The fox is guarding the hen house, and so they never share the underlying factors that could eliminate this unnecessary and toxic service every year. And so, yeah, there's some good examples from that industry too.
That is great. Okay, so when I was researching for this podcast, I came across a term that you use called a good contract but a bad deal.
Yeah, good contract, bad deal. We see it all the time. It's really, this follows up perfectly to the stuff we were talking about, how the lean procurement has evolved over the last 15 years and how the suppliers have noticed and devised strategies to grow margin. And this is if anything, I would say it's the norm in the industries that we specialize in. Is a smart procurement resource has done their best and has put a good contract in place. And what does that contract do? As the literal answer is, it resides in a file folder on somebody's machine. It sits there. It doesn't have the ability to enforce itself. It's a means to promote an outcome. And out there in the real world, invoices are coming in and checks are flying out the door, and everybody's running around like a chicken with their head cut off. And procurement doesn't have the bandwidth to be engaged in that joust over week to week, month to month invoices the way they might in a perfect world. And so little by little, and sometimes it's not even non-compliance, but it's stuff like new products and services that get added over time, where 2.5 years into a 3-year deal, you look at the invoicing and go, wow, 60% of this program is off contract. The 40% that's on contract, a pretty good deal. The 60% that is off contract is all book price, which is 50 to 60% margin. And the net of it all is they're spending 30, 35% more than they could be, if this had been better managed along the way. There's a good contract sitting in a file folder, but there's a bad deal, hitting the P&L.
Right. And that leads to my very next question. Give me an example of something that's off contract that may take an owner by surprise.
Sure. Well, gosh, the uniform industry is a great example of this, because, all of the leading suppliers in this industry have layers of their organizations that are incentivized to just constantly be introducing new products and services, and sometimes just even line items, that aren't for a product or a service, just a new charge that were not contemplated in the original agreement. A lot of times in that industry, for example, this stuff happens where, you've got commissioned route people, and then you've got plants and branches that run competitions for a month. Hey guys, we're going to have an ads versus stop contest this month. Whoever adds the most new products to their accounts, net of anything they have to remove from the account, gets a $500 Best Buy gift card, and so now they're all out there like, and a lot of times it starts with a free trial. Hey, I'm gonna give you a 30-day free trial on these air fresheners, and they pop a dozen of them up into a handful of bathrooms. And 30 days later, nobody says anything, and it just appears on the invoice. The free trial's over, and now this is a part of your program. And so, right. We see a ton of that. It's almost like, for any of your listeners that have managed MRO supplies, with the likes of a Grainger or something like that, you negotiate this market basket, and it feels like as soon as your work is done, part number 00015, which is in your market basket, is replaced with 00015-02, which is not. And
right.
Instead of a 50% discount, you're getting 10. And, this is a common thread through a lot of industries, I suspect, and certainly in the ones we specialize in, we see a lot of that. The suppliers want to render your contract as irrelevant and obsolete as they can, as quickly as possible after the deal is done.
And I would imagine that during the COVID period, you saw a lot of this creep up, right? Especially with chemicals, everybody had to have, I know for me as a buyer, at the very beginning of the pandemic, there was this giant push to get your hands on chemicals.
Sure.
And it was like a Wild West.
The temperature screening stuff and guard services I alluded to was certainly a part of that. And we saw very high margin cleaning products and services offered by both uniform suppliers and pest control suppliers. But what really exacerbated all this was, because everybody in procurement was so overburdened in those times, what I saw just a rash of for multiple years on end, from 2020, 21, and still seeing it honestly to this day, is so many occasions where the category manager who really would like to take a deep dive into a category and do a proper marketplace exercise, or even just like a really informed direct negotiation with an incumbent, simply doesn't have the bandwidth to do it. And so I'm seeing so many like short-term 1-year extensions of bad deals, right? And so you have this stuff creeping into your accounts, but you also have those agreements getting extended year and another year and another year, where the off contract problem and the other stuff that's creeped in, to your accounts not getting fixed. And so it's, yeah, these things are all kind of snowballing, if you will.
And and that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Now that we're coming a little bit into post-pandemic world, God willing, those contracts that were so crucial in 2019, 2020, 2021 are still hanging out there, right?
In many, many cases. Yeah. We've seen so many occasions where, where somebody finally becomes our client. We've been working with them for, potentially sometimes a protracted sales process. And we'll look at the contract history and we'll see original agreement signed 8 years ago. And there's, 6 addenda, and the last 3 or 4 of them have all been like, 1-year extensions. And occasionally the customer extracted something like a modest extension of payment terms, and all the while, what was originally a 6% margin deal has slowly grown to 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and there's a really bad deal that's getting extended year after year. And it's, it's not like it's the category manager's fault that everybody's, ridiculously overburdened. And so it's, it's a demanding time to be in that field for sure.
So let's talk about, you have mentioned several times a category manager, but I know from my experience that a lot of times these small hoteliers don't have that. They're doing it themselves. These little one-off, they own 1 or 2 properties. They're handling all of this themselves.
Yep.
Let's talk about solutions. What would you tell them to do? And obviously we want to roll this back to FineTune, but what are they looking for and what services are you providing for them?
Well, and before I, get too, evangelical about us, let me just talk about the broader arena that we're a part of. I think right now, we've spent some time on the bad news, right? Everybody's overburdened and understaffed. And as you get to smaller hoteliers and small businesses in general, it's even more the case, that everybody wears 8 different hats, and so I think the bad news, of course, is you're overburdened, you're understaffed, and your suppliers have noticed this and they found good, crafty ways to take advantage. There is a little bit of a silver lining or some good news in all this, which is, as tends to be the case in a healthy economy, solutions do emerge to address weaknesses. And there is the arena that we're a part of, kind of this, and it's kind of the technology fueled procurement and expense management solutions arena. It's been on fire in recent years, and there's, we're just one enterprise among many in this field that has basically, if you were to just kind of roll up to 30,000 feet and try to say what the entire arena is designed to do, it's designed to help the people who are being asked to do the work of 2 to 3 people actually do that, and so what do you bring to bear for them? You bring efficiencies, expertise, technology, and ultimately solutions that are designed to help them engage in the joust and combat the practices that are attacking their bottom line in a way that's healthy, where the buyer-seller joust is happening the way it's supposed to. So, for us, we've built this business around, a small handful of the most complicated, complex, and burdensome expenses, where we know that margins don't tend to be 8 to 12, they tend to be 25 to 50%. And we started by saying, I need absolute world-class experts. And I'll give you one example in the uniform industry. Our category leader there, who's now my COO too, but he's the senior VP of uniform services, a guy named Brian Gamble. I would say he's probably the world's foremost expert in that industry. When he resigned his position at Aramark a decade ago to join us, he was their youngest of their regional vice presidents, ran an 8-state region for them, and had worked there 20 years. Started loading pallets on trucks and drove a route and managed the route people, managed all of Chicago, and then managed an 8-state region as a RVP. But now he has 10 years of client advocacy, where he's, kind of working on the other side of the table that he used to sit on. And he's the face and voice in the marketplace of, some of the largest accounts in the country, dealing with not just his former employer, but all the industry's suppliers at the C-level, national accounts, field operations. I don't think there's anybody worldwide that quite has that exact resume and that broad purview of such a complex industry landscape. And so, you know, we start with that and bringing world-class experts to bear, but we've also built some really cool proprietary technology that we call EMOTE, stands for Expense Management Optimization and Auditing Technology. And it's kind of the ultimate expense management laser. You know, at one end of the spectrum, you've got these broad enterprise solutions like Ariba and Coupa. What EMOTE is an application designed to audit and enforce optimal spend, but it is built not even just around specific industries, it's built around specific suppliers within those industries. So if you can imagine, you're trying to audit, for example, the uniform category. Well, the uniform industry's leaders don't even all agree on what the word inventory means. They define it differently, and their different definitions have multiple dozens of ripple effects into various different line items in their invoicing. So when we went to build EMOTE, you've got these highest level category experts sitting with our software developers saying, well, no, for Cintas, you need to build it this way, but for Aramark, you need to build it this way. For Allsco, you got to build it this way. For UniFirst, you got to build it this way, you know, and doing that literally on a charge by charge phenomenon basis. So, you know, I don't know of anywhere else where this level of laser focused auditing software exists. And that's, you know, when combined with the expertise and then the technology to enable them to act efficiently. And it's been a lot of trial and error. You know, we're into our third decade now. We've been at this for a while, but we really have finally like arrived at a really sophisticated solution to these really complex problems of these most, you know, burdensome indirect services.
That's amazing. Okay, so how would you like people to reach out to you?
FineTuneUS.com is the website. You can holler at me directly on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to hear from listeners after I'm out there speaking in one form or another. So, you know, you can even email if you want to go old school, rham@FineTuneUS.com. That's how you can get me. But come and visit us on the web. The little chat robot will, you know, say, hi, how can I help you? And you can reach out to us that way too. Whatever's your favorite means of outreach, we'll be there.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this, Rich.
Of course, Sharon, it was a pleasure.
Okay, hold on.